Many social psychologists and other researchers study this question. It seems to be especially popular today. The question of what accounts for the difference between some people who experience trauma and are able to move on to live meaningful and productive lives, and others who experience trauma and never again find their path. The question of resilience and how one incorporates and moves forward after trauma. There are many complex factors that are involved in what might determine or at least factor into that question, the answer to that question, including many nature and nurture components. And I will leave the details of that to those researchers who know way more than I do about this topic. But one of the factors that is illuminated or has been illuminated to be to have to say that it is a contributing factor towards resilience, towards recovery and healing past trauma is one's relationship to religion, in particular, a positive relationship to religion. The idea that religion can be a source of resilience, or at least a piece of this puzzle of recovery and acceptance and integration of trauma and moving forward with one's life, is something that we at SAJ embrace wholeheartedly. We have a mental health committee task force, and that mental health committee made sure at the beginning when it started to call itself a mental health and resiliency task force, because we understand that mental health and positive mental health is not only something that needs to be addressed. It needs to be addressed on all levels, including through our own practices and through our own community. We understand and believe that Judaism and Jewish practice offer resources that can help a person potentially lean more towards the path of resilience and recovery, that might help a person integrate traumatic experiences into their own lives and find their own voice in that process. And believe it or not, one of the roots of this idea comes from our Torah portion, Parshat Tzav. After last week's litany of sacrificial offerings, the types, the requirements, etc., in this week's Torah portion, we hear some repetition of those, but also a new type of sacrifice altogether that is introduced in this Parsha, the second Parsha in Leviticus, and one that seems a little different from the rest. And that is the Zevach Todah, the Thanksgiving offering. In the beginning of chapter 7 of our Parsha, it says, if a person offers the sacrifice as a Thanksgiving offering, a Zevach Todah, then along with this Thanksgiving offering, he is to offer unleavened loaves mixed with oil, unleavened wafers spread with oil, and loaves of fine flour well kneaded and mixed with oil. When examining the Zevach Todah, the rabbis of the Talmud seemed a little bothered, or at least that's my interpretation of their interpretation, that the Thanksgiving ritual is not more specifically assigned. Other sacrifices are clear. If you commit an accidental sin that might negatively impact the space that is shared among the community, you know which offering to provide, right? If you can follow these very clear instructions, but with the Thanksgiving offering, it seems a little bit more ambiguous. Couldn't any of us at any time desire to say thank you and make that sacrifice? And if these sacrifices become a model for prayer, we would imagine that this Thanksgiving offering could be given each morning, each day, by each individual, just like when we wake up in the morning, we are taught and invited to say Moda Ani, a prayer of gratitude. Remember, the sacrifices require, well, a lot of sacrifice. They're expensive, they're big, they're part of your crops, they're part of your, part of the things that you treasure the most in the world, and they're your greatest resources. So we can't really imagine that this Zevach Todah would be done on a regular basis by any sort of lay leader and lay person. So the rabbis teach that the Zevach Todah, this Thanksgiving offering, is given by those who have escaped a dangerous and potentially traumatic situation. They look to Psalm 107, the psalm in which the words appear, Hodu Ladonai ki tov, ki leolam chasto, give thanks to God, for God's grace is good. One of the most important expressions of gratitude in our tradition. And they look at that psalm and they find that the psalm refers to 4 potentially life-threatening situations, and that these 4 potentially life-threatening situations become the basis of the Thanksgiving offering. The 4 are those who had a harrowing journey across a sea, which we can imagine in those days was a life threatening experience. Someone who had a harrowing desert across a desert, which we know from our Torah was a harrowing experience for our ancestors. Those who have recovered from a serious illness, and those who have been imprisoned and then become free. These are the categories of people that the Zevach Todah refers to according to the rabbis. So it is not given by just anyone. It is given by people in very particular circumstances of emerging out of a dangerous, life-threatening, potentially traumatic situation. As some of you may already suspect, the Zevach Todah continues today in a new form, or a form established after the destruction of the temple, the form of the Birkat HaGomel blessing, in which members of a community who have experienced these kinds of potentially life-threatening events come before the congregation after the fact and say thank you in front of the congregation. Thank you to the Holy One who has done good for me. And then the congregation responds, may the one who has rewarded you with goodness reward you forever. Today, people might come forward after recovery from surgery, after a car accident, after the completion of treatments for cancer or another type of health situation, after childbirth, after a difficult journey, and so on. The rabbi's choice to connect being on the other side of trauma or life-threatening situation with this Zevach Todah leaves us with a very beautiful legacy, and also imagines that it will be continued forever, this Zevach Todah, unlike all the other offerings, that it becomes alive in a new form for us to continue on. It could have easily been a very different choice. The rabbis could have said that the Thanksgiving offering was for someone who had a great year with the crops, for someone who was elected to a community leadership position, but instead it focused on people who survived something very difficult. And this goes back to the question I raised at the beginning, or the conversation I raised at the beginning. Vehicles that can promote resilience and moving forward after trauma. The rabbis somehow intuited this very important need that all of us as human beings have. For those of us who have struggled and then gone to the other side and figured out and trying to figure out who we are after those traumatic experiences. Offering this ritual to acknowledge what has happened is something that is potentially transformative. And they offered a ritual to acknowledge without trying to fix or make pretty the difficult things that we have gone through. And most importantly, to say thank you for being alive despite the difficult things that have happened to us. It's important and meaningful to note that one does not say Gomel, according to our tradition, in the midst of a challenging situation. So you wouldn't come sort of halfway through a process of treatment, you come after. The person offering the sacrifice thousands of years ago and the person saying Gomel today is not thanking God for the thing that happened to him. Contrary to sort of popular psychology, this is not about saying trauma is positive or growthful. It does not have to be. It is about being seen for what we have experienced And it is an incredibly powerful tool for integrating the who you were before with the who that you are now. I also see this practice of Zevach Todah and the Gomel as a tool for noting one's strength and for finding a way forward. When a person has gone through a harrowing experience and can stand up and recognize that despite everything that happened, they are still alive and have the power to bless, perhaps they can also see a potential future of blessings ahead of them. I think about all of those who have experienced various kinds of traumas in their life, and I wonder what would happen if all of them were able to do a ritual like this. How would it change the story of the past and the present? And there is also another part of this teaching that I find so meaningful and so powerful. And this is well articulated by Dr. Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Weinreb in a Devar Torah he wrote about this topic and about the Birkat HaGomel connection to this Parsha. And he teaches about the necessity of spiritual community, not only the ritual itself, but the people, the presence of people in this ritual and what that means. The rabbis in the Talmud not only explain who will give the Zevach Todah, but they also teach something really important. They say that when you give a Zevach Todah, a person has to bring an entire animal and a total of 40 loaves of bread, 10 from 4 different species, and you donate one of each species to the priest. So if you think about that math of the menu of what they are bringing, this leaves the person making the sacrifice with a lot of leftovers, including the meat of an entire animal and including a lot of loaves of bread that all have to be eaten before dawn the next day. Given that there is absolutely no way that one person could finish all of this food in just a few hours, we learn from this that the Thanksgiving offering was never meant to be a private affair. One had to invite friends, family, and even acquaintances to join in the Thanksgiving and in the celebration. And during that time, the person would relate their story and they would all share, everyone present, in praise and communal song. This ritual of Thanksgiving, born out of fear, danger, and trauma, turns from an individual act to an opportunity for community solidarity. The presence of community is transformative. And the person knows they are not alone. And for anyone who has benched Gomel, who has said this Birkat HaGomel in services at SAJ or elsewhere, I am confident that that sense of being seen, telling your story, and being responded to with those words resonates in this way, this sense of not being alone. The speaking aloud to a community is also powerful. As Rabbi Bar Shaul quoted from Rabbi Weinrab says, the narration of one story changes the story. Perhaps when we tell the story alone, we could find ourselves stuck in old narratives, or as I mentioned before, the negative narratives. Those narratives often resonate in our minds, how bad things always seem to happen to us, how maybe we're not deserving of what is good. But when we change that narrative and tell it in the context of community, a community that can see us and that can resonate their own experiences to yours and relate those experiences, that changes the narrative, that transforms the narrative story only from a story of resilience. Only from a story of victimhood to hopefully a story of resilience. This does not have to mean that we erase or try to erase the difficulties that have happened, because that in of itself will not help anyone. But having this kind of public ritual, this kind of narrative sharing, this Zevach Todah opens the person towards a more positive future. to seeing themselves part of something greater than themselves, to seeing their story in a context, and to integrating it into their own experiences of who they are and finding now who they can become. It gives a chance to retell our story as a story of gratitude for survival, of resilience of our own actions, of the ability to take stock and to look forward. So I'm going to pause here and invite us. And Cantorlise, I'm going to leave this up to you since I'm not there in person to either maybe ask people to talk in small groups, or if anyone wants to share any thoughts about their own experiences. So I have a couple questions, and you can use this or any other experiences that you want to share, either in small groups or in discussion format, however you choose. So how does, number one, these are open-ended questions, and you can also find your own. How does Jewish spiritual practice and or Jewish community help you survive, thrive, integrate, and reclaim your story? What helps you tell new stories of the challenging experiences you have had in your own life? How do we navigate life in the middle, where we are not where we were and where we are not on the other side? This is our beautiful tradition in this context does not share about that middle part, but it is also critical. And based on this teaching, how might we consider expanding the categories of Gomel, of categories of who would come to forward for a blessing of Gomel? And leave it up to you.